Okay. Can everybody see that? Are we all right? Is it? Can somebody wave a hand? And yes, great.
It's
okay.
Good.
So it's working. Excellent. Well, thank you for the introduction, Lucy. It's a pleasure for me to be doing this, I discovered as I prepared it. And that the reason is that I found myself going back to my professional skills of explaining things that seem a bit complicated. So that's why I've enjoyed it, and I hope that you will too. Any event, thank you for showing up to watch and to listen. So I begin in the only way I can by setting out my aims and objectives. I hope some of you have some familiarity with the OU and its style, and then this will be familiar. So this is what I'm hoping to do. And essentially there are two things. Those are my purposes. And I'm hoping to provide a little entertainment along the way. I prefer it if my audience stays awake. However, as a Scot, it's possible my humor may go unnoticed, and that's why you have to stay awake. I used to try self-deprecating jokes, but I was no good at them, especially on Zoom. Anyway, let's go on. Here are my objectives. And the point you can read those for yourself, and the point I want to make here is that I'm not actually trying to sell you the idea. At most, I want you to try it for the next hour or so, give it a test drive, so you can decide what use, if any, you might have for it. Before I do the explaining, let's consider those two questions. Heather, can you give me some pointers as to what was posted up in the chat?
Quite a range of different points. Leading by example, we're asking our leaders to lead by example with clarity and good examples, with meaningful consultation to find what is socially acceptable to everybody else, and making existing Paris commitments happen, making the rhetoric a reality. And the big one, stop funding and promoting the use of fossil fuels and move on areas other than electricity generation, and helping developing countries, and listening to the young, of course, like Greta. Greta. Yeah, I think those are most of them.
Those are most of them. Okay, so most of those sound like they're tackling the first question. That's fine. I've been trying out these questions on a number of people, some quite senior figures among Green campaigners, and I tend to get two sorts of answers. Some of them are general exhortations of the form, just meet the targets you've set, which was one of what was coming through. Or we get long programs of good, but sometimes controversial initiatives. And my point is this: how many of you remember the Cancel the Debt campaign and the big Gleneagles conference in the year 2000? I think some of you are old enough to do that. Now, the point about that was that it was a very focused request. It was very clear and very simple. Just cancel the debt. I think those of us who knew something about development issues, and certainly the leaders of the campaign, knew that that wouldn't be an answer to everything. But my goodness, it was a powerful, focused request, and it had great leverage. So it didn't solve all the problems, but it released huge resources to health and education over the next 10 years. It made a great impact. And my suggestion is that we need a similar, simple, specific, and winnable focus for this great moment. Okay, and then on the second question, when people have tried to answer it, I'm afraid the responses have been pretty much of a likeness. They've all been of the form, we must campaign harder, we must, reassure and persuade the waverers. Now, the difficulty is that such answers to the second question require many more people to think like us. Is that realistic? And is that realistic by November? I have to say that even if it was, it makes me a little uneasy because it starts from the idea that we know and they don't. So there's in terms of how they should live their lives in these difficult times. So there's a point there about campaigning and relational campaigning that my phone is going off. Would you believe it? Sorry about that. Sorry about that. The difficulty is that it's about getting people to think like us. And what is missing from the responses is any suggestion that carbon pricing, that the price of carbon might be part of the answer. And that really, in all these discussions, carbon pricing has been the proverbial elephant in the room. And that's my suggestion for a way of thinking about it. And here's the issue. Government have known for 20 years or more that they must raise the price of carbon. But this is unpopular with voters, and our leaders are scared, even terrified about doing it. That's a point I'll keep returning to. And aware of this reluctance, Green campaigners have focused on other ways to reduce CO2. And some of these are shown in the speech bubbles. I think they're all good ideas. They all have some merit. I think you'll be familiar with them. And so the question then is, how does carbon fee and dividend, or carbon fee and climate income, or we can call it carbon pricing with economic security, they're all referring to the same thing. How does that help? And here's the point. Carbon fee and dividend will actually assist every single one of the proposals and calls in those speech bubbles of the people with their backs to the elephant. Embracing carbon fee and dividend does not mean dropping any of your existing commitments. It will fit beautifully alongside them. Okay, so with that as the warm-up, here's the shape of the session. We've already done this. I'm going to talk, actually, I don't think it'll take 15 minutes, but to explain the essentials of carbon fee and dividend, how and why it works in terms of economics and politics. Then there's breakouts, feedback and discussion, and then the next steps. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward, and let's get started. Here is what the essentials of the policy are. And the first point is, let's be clear, this is not a tax. Okay, the Treasury has no more part in this than it has in the BBC license fee. That's an important point, because even if you trust our politicians to spend an additional tax wisely, surveys show that most people are not so trusting, especially when it comes to promises on tax and benefits. So it's not a tax. The funds raised are paid directly back to citizens and not as a means-tested benefit. Adults are treated like adults and supported so they can all, each one, play their part in the great transition. This arrangement means, sorry, I should have mentioned that it's an important part of it, that the levy increases steadily. That's important because it means businesses know what to expect. Now, and then the punchline is that the carbon fees are shared out equally and directly among all adult citizens. This is the climate income element. The point of this is, it means that what would otherwise be a highly regressive, if it were a tax, becomes a redistributive transfer that's tied to the requirements of the climate. Indeed, the less well-off come out ahead. One credible assessment of the effect showed that the least well-off 20% of the income distribution would receive back 50% more in climate income than they will lose in additional fuel costs. Why so? Because the rich use so much more fuel than the rest of us. This means they raise the flat rate per capita payouts well above the median of the additional payments. There are two other elements that are necessary to make this work, or at least to mention. The levies paid at, there is a levy required at ports of entry on fossil fuels to prevent feed dodging. This is, some of you will know, I'm sure, the talk about the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And this is needed by any version of carbon pricing, including by the emissions trading scheme that the government intends to introduce to replace the European scheme. So there's nothing exceptional, unusual in this requirement. If you're serious about any form of carbon pricing, and the government says it is, then this is something that has to be addressed. I know the Treasury is a bit reluctant on this at the moment, but the more the carbon pricing builds up, the more important it becomes. But that last final point is just to say that this scheme isn't rigid. There's lots of ways that carbon fee and dividend can be implemented. It's an approach that can be adapted to circumstances. For example, in Canada, they use a percentage as a contribution to meet the additional costs that are borne by public bodies that cannot raise prices to recoup the additional expense. Okay. That's it. Now you know what carbon fee and the essentials of carbon fee and dividend. So why does this work? Well, the more obvious economic rationale is that the polluter is made to pay the full cost of using carbon, including the costs that are external to the extraction and processing of fossil fuels. This has become well understood and widely accepted as a principle. Just as clearly, this is a policy that works with the grain of economic life. It does not ask individuals to suspend or sacrifice their immediate economic interest so as to do the right thing. It makes it in their clear economic interest to do the right thing. I think that is so important in terms of building support for the policy, and we'll return to it. But actually, it's this third point that, for me, is the central contribution of carbon fee and dividend. It addresses this underlying issue. How do we as a society discover a viable green fuels mix and bring costs right down fast? The fact is that no one knows what the best alternative fuel mix will turn out to be. The technologies are still too uncertain. Each has its advocates and investors willing to bet on them, but each also has disadvantages, snags, and unknowns. So how does a society solve this sort of problem? Well, actually, there's quite a bit that's now understood about the conditions for rapid technological advance. And this isn't green economics I'm giving you now. This is mainstream industrial dynamics. What's needed if you want a technology to develop fast is a stable industrial policy. If people are to innovate, they don't want additional political risks. So they need to have some certainty about the framework they're operating within. The second thing is you need strong and rising consumer demand to stimulate investment. And of course, that's part of what's provided by carbon fee and dividend. You need a range of promising technologies underpinned by a strong research base, and you need a range of green energy financiers. And we have those in this country, actually. some very smart people who can intermediate to fund green schemes. These are the conditions for what the economist John Kay calls disciplined pluralism. And this is not the same as just free market economics, let the market rip. This is a market that's guided and steered. And but it doesn't involve governments taking bets on our behalf and claiming to know what the future will foretell and betting on winners. It allows for pluralism and exploration. So how can I be so sure this will work, which is the right question? Forecasts are very difficult, especially about the future. And that's not just a silly joke, it's actually quite shrewd, because the further we peer into the future, the dodgier any forecasts become. We do not and cannot know quite how rapidly these developmental processes will unfold. I accept that. That said, the past experience of innovation bears this, gives grounds for this degree of optimism about the scope for a rapid discovery of new solutions. And I'm giving examples from wind turbine, from, as it were, green technologies, but it's true across a whole range of industries. And this is partly to do with economies of scale, and of course they're terribly important. But more so, it's about industry learning curves. And that's the key idea. What seems to happen is an industry-wide learning process that generates steady improvements in performance year on year. You can see this still happening with battery technology, where the price-performance ratio keeps edging up even after years of large-scale production. So you can, I hope, understand why business leaders positively drool at the idea of carbon fee and dividend. For what it's worth too, I'm told that this policy has more Nobel Prize winning economists signed up in support than any other public policy ever. Okay, so those are the grounds for having confidence in the policy. But now let's come to how and why it works and the politics. Because our way of life has been hooked on carbon, coming off it presages a prolonged detox and some very rough decades. Delay will make things worse, yet, as I've said already, the idea of raising the price of fuel terrifies our politicians. You'll remember this image, I'm sure. We had our own fuel tax protests in the early noughties. So there's a sense in which the politicians are absolutely right to be alarmed. A fuel tax is highly regressive because fuel is an essential in the household budget. Which is to say that in the short term, it may be very hard to cut back on its use. So for the less well off, raising its price in through a tax reduces sharply what little discretionary spending remains after essential bills have been met. But the fee and dividend arrangement resolves this issue. It can even make the fuel rise popular. So we can reassure our leaders that it's possible to use assertive carbon pricing without undermining public order, and that we will support them if they do it this way. I think there's more to be said actually about the issue of public safety and public order in a time of climate breakdown. And it's an argument in Citizens MK that we used in discussion with the Police and Crime Commissioner, with whom we're now in dialogue for Thames Valley, that climate change is a crime prevention issue. Anyway, let me not distract myself. The second reason I think that this works in terms of the politics is it's a very subtle and appropriate blend of individual responsibility and collective action. The government does what only the government can do without presuming to know all the answers or doing things for and to people. Equally, the CF&D approach does not put all the onus on individuals, implying it is simply up to each of us to reduce our own carbon footprint on our own, as if we were not interdependent in our communities. Under CF&D, the government creates a stable framework and then holds the ring, while private and social enterprises, civil society and public organizations work out what is best in their particular circumstances as new industries and solutions evolve. Okay, but here's what I think is the most important point. We do not all have to think alike. Think what's needed if we are to avoid a backlash and sustain the difficult policies through a huge industrial transition. The support of progressive activists, I presume that most of us would fall into that demographic. The support of progressive activists is not going to be enough. Our political leaders require the acquiescence of climate cynics, the buy-in of those preoccupied just with themselves in the short term for whatever reasons. And I think we have quite a lot of people, given the difficulties of economic life at the moment, who are in that situation. And also they need the support from the confused and the ambivalent, who are not sure quite what they think about some of this stuff. And there are many issues in which I would count myself among them. So we need a basis for climate policies that doesn't expect everyone to share the same mindset. And that's what Carbon Fee and Dividend offers. It is actually a plan for all reasons. The beauty of this ingenious idea is that it can appeal to practically everyone. Crucially, for those who are only able to think of themselves and their immediate family, at least I will be no worse off. Those who consider, sorry, I've clicked, I'll go back. Those who consider politics through the lens of power tend to be concerned about political stability and the social order in a time of extreme climate events and industrial upheaval. And as I've hinted already, I think they're right to be concerned in that way. For them, this approach buys the necessary support for a strong cross-party coalition that can sustain difficult decisions. For upholders of the moral and legal order, the policy appeals not just because it does what it's right for both citizens and the climate, it's also enforceable in a way that many of the other schemes are not. It's the simplicity of its administration, which is one of its attractions. And for business pragmatists, well, they just love the economic opportunities that it fosters. Sympathetic coverage has appeared in the business press, from the Wall Street Journal to the Financial Times. And of course, for the eco-egalitarians, that segment, it's a sizable step towards the broader goal of climate justice. So you can support this policy, whatever your political affiliation. As happened in Canada, it actually brings together Democrats and Republicans in the US. And it also happened, as we've shown, in Milton Keynes. You can visit the website and see the statements of support that the leaders of all the three main groupings in our council made in support. Okay, so the essential message is this, and I'm returning to the point about finding a way of reassuring our leaders. They're busking it. They don't really know what to do, and they're scared, they're frightened, it's difficult. And I think we need to give them the reassurance that we're ready to face the challenges. Let's get on with it and support each other through it. So the message is, don't be put off by tabloid headlines and some rather shoddy, ill-explained focus group research, where the question that came up almost inevitably was, will turkeys vote for Christmas? And so the carbon fee and dividend answer is yes, they will, so long as it's a vegetarian Christmas and they can trust the farmer. And by that, I mean that no one gets eaten. People are looked after. And we must be able to trust the government that the carbon levy will not be redirected for other purposes. If it is tackled in this way, we might even go some way towards restoring trust in government and bringing our country back together again. Time for a breakout. I'm going to stop sharing, I think, and hand back to Lucy.
You've given us an excellent grounding in carbon fee and dividend. And so now we've got, we're going to have some breakout rooms with probably about 4 people in each room. I suggest for about 5 minutes. Do you think that's adequate? And you're going to have a few questions, which if Rob, you can share your screen, the questions to think about from your reactions of what you've heard.
Oh, well, I could do, I'd rather, I think, just leave it with, I did have some, yes, I beg your pardon. I'd forgotten.
So the questions you had were what's...
Yeah, what struck me, yes, I beg your pardon. I'll leave it there. I switched it off too soon. Hold tight, coming very shortly. I've got to escape from this.
So while Rob gets the questions, they were what struck me. So from what you've heard, some of it might be new to you, some of it you might have been quite familiar with, but what struck you from what Rob said? What do you want to sort of hold on to from what you said, perhaps to share and tell other people? And also what's unclear to you? So if there are things you think, I'm not quite sure about this, I don't feel that's quite clear, or I could persuade anyone fully with what I've heard. So those are the kind of things we'd like you just to sort of spend 5 minutes chatting to the people that you're in a room with, and then you can come back and tell us your thoughts in a few minutes. So here we are. So here are the questions. Just informally feeding back, because we're not a huge group. So after the 5 minutes, you can discuss.
Lucy, could I suggest maybe a little bit longer than 5 minutes? Maybe about going on for 10 or something like that. So we'll see how we go. I'm going to create breakout rooms now, and you'll have an invitation to join a breakout room. It's up to you whether you accept that invitation, but we rather hope that you will, and just talk to each other informally. So I'm going to try and make that work now.
Thanks, Colin.
If Lucy or you, Rob, want to join any of the breakout rooms, you can, obviously.
Yes,
but you might not want to.
I think I just need a pause, I think.
Yeah.
That's fine, thanks.
Okay, so yeah, give it towards 10, I suggest. I'll give it another minute or two, Rob.
Right. That's good. There's yeah, there's some interesting comments coming in.
I wonder if Lucy's gone into a group somewhere. Seem to have lost her. Oh yes, no, she's joined group 2. Okay. I think one of us will need to emphasize that people do put their ideas and thoughts and questions to you into chat as they come back, if they haven't already done that. Right. If I close all rooms about now, Rob, it'll be a minute before all rooms are closed automatically.
That's fine. Yeah.
Does that seem all right to you?
Yes, that sounds good to me. I think we've given them a chance to kick things around a bit, and we've seen some interesting comments come in on chat.
Yeah. Okay.
And I can busk it for a few minutes now. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thank you. It's been very interesting so far, and it'll be very interesting to see what people think and say.
Yeah.
Right, I'm going to close all rooms now.
So welcome back, everyone. I think nearly everyone's back in. So some of you might have been big fans of this. Some of you might have had reservations. In the room I was in, we mostly thought this sounds like a great idea, but what's the catch? I think we'd sum it up as what's the catch? Because if everyone likes it, which is an important thing in terms of campaigning and in terms of getting agreement, is there a catch? Do people want to type their questions briefly into the chat so Rob can pick them out and reassure you or elaborate where you need a bit more detail? I say Heather says, what's the catch?
Yeah.
So should we start with Heather's question, Rob? What scale of dividend are we talking about?
Yeah, okay. The first thing to say is that it doesn't have to start at a very aggressive level. It can start gently. What's really important is that the predictability that it's going to go on rising. That's the crucial element in it. Yeah, and then people will come to terms with it, but it's not an immediate, damaging, drastic body blow. So that's that. I think that's the first thing about the price. Sorry, the second question was, this is where being old doesn't help. Heather, remind me of some of what was the related point? Oh, then there's, I see one's come in about impact on the poorer members of society. And there was a related question. What about those, which is very important, who are, who have atypical lifestyles, who actually need to use a lot of fuel for one reason or another? And I think there is a problem there, just like if you live in slum housing, and you can't, and you're not very well off at all, how can you afford, you can't do up, your landlord's not going to do up your house for you and insulate the windows and triple glaze and all that kind of stuff. So how can you afford to do that? The answer is you probably can't. So there are some situations, atypical situations, where what works so well on average is still not going to be right. So I think we just have to accept that that's the case. But if we've got a problem with slum landlords, I suggest we deal with slum landlords as a separate issue rather than use it to hold up what I would still hold on to as the single most important initiative, the carbon pricing approach. Somebody's, I think, answering a question for me there about the Grantham Institute reckons, what was that one going to be? Yes, 2/3 will get more than they spend. And actually the bottom, as I said in the talk, the bottom 20% get 50% more than the additional cost. So there is some slack here to deal with those difficult cases where the less well off. So as far as any single general policy can go, I think it covers these bases. I think that the question that fascinates me and that has been raised is, if this is such a smart idea, how come it hasn't been taken up elsewhere? What's the problem? And I don't see a catch, and bless them, the Canadians haven't yet seen a catch. I can see reasons why there are political blocks to it, but not any coherent arguments against it. The political blocks arise if you talk about it as a tax and you let the Treasury come into the discussion. So my view is, I don't know if this is realistic, I may be being naive here. My view is that we say, well, listen, the BBC license fee isn't settled by the Treasury. That's dealt with by culture, media, and sports. It's a different, and there are different ministries that will deal with this as a matter of climate policy. And that's how it should be handled. And they should be the lead on it. There shouldn't be a block. Because, that's one answer for the Treasury problem. The other answer for the Treasury problem is, okay, don't worry, you won't have quite the same degree of control over raising funds for some years. But the beauty of this scheme is that it is actually self-extinguishing. As people move off carbon, the pot shrinks, and they'll move off carbon in droves as the price of the alternatives falls. That's the crucial thing. And the point about what's the price of carbon that you should set is enough to start the move away, to encourage it, to make it in people's interests. So they look ahead and they see which way the wind's blowing. They say, okay, I really will check out the heat pump option or the hydrogen option or whatever.
Rob?
Yeah?
Can I add a few points?
Good.
Firstly, I think that as you know, and I spoke to my group about the fact that the government, I think, has been having an argument about this, because there was a leak in July where Boris was actually looking at the Canadian scheme. But I think the Treasury doesn't like things that don't raise revenue. And at the moment, you know, fuel duty is, you know, they keep saying, where will we replace that 27 billion? I'm losing the plot on this.
Catherine,
and it doesn't like hypothecated taxes either.
That's true, but they've just brought one in relation to the health and social care stuff. So they're losing that argument. So I think that I think there are responses and ways of dealing with it, but these are political obstacles in the discussion that takes place. They're not compelling reasons saying why it won't work. And for me, what's been so interesting over the last 6 or 9 months as I've raised this question is the kind of puzzlement and almost sheepishness sometimes on the part of Green campaigners, a sort of disbelief that this idea could have been hiding in plain sight and they didn't know about it. They're often, some quite senior people have been too embarrassed to admit that they hadn't heard about it. And then to be fair to them, our politicians in Milton Keynes, 3-party leaders, including the council leader, who's a very good record on green issues, fessed up to not knowing anything about it or little of anything about it and said, we've got to do our homework. They came back and did the homework and they said, right, we're for it. So it's a real puzzle as to how this idea has been hiding in plain sight. I think part of the answer may be to do with the mindsets that people have. It must be one thing or the other. It must be a free market thing, or it must be a government intervention thing. The idea that you could do something that combines and blends these and that isn't adversarial. Remember, campaigning in politics is so often an adversarial exercise in our political system. I think that's part of the reason, but I don't know, I'm only speculating. Let's go for another question.
Could I ask something, Rob? What about China and Russia and Brazil and Australia, you know, those big emitters?
Yeah.
I mean, are they going to get involved in this?
Well, I think that the best thing I can say there is, and it was said, I think, but on the chat at the start, that I'm sorry, I've lost my screen, come back. Am I still there? Yes, I am. Good. It was said at the start, the best thing that the UK can do is set an example. If we do carbon pricing, the more countries do carbon pricing in one way or another, assertively, as the phrase I use, the more others will follow. And so I think that we have reasonable grounds for supposing, especially if China can't export without facing carbon border adjustment mechanisms around it, it's going to, I mean, actually, I trust China to come on board fairly quickly with a lot of this stuff, but that's another debate. So I think the best thing we can do is set an example, accelerate the rollout of alternative energy systems, and the rest, that we can't do more than that. We can't make things happen all around the world. So that would be my response to that. Okay, thank you.
I would say that carbon border adjustments, which can be used with ETS and carbon fee dividend, but they are making countries think again. It's interesting because Turkey exports a lot of, has heavy industries that export a lot of things to the EU, and it's actually thinking of imposing its own carbon price because it's been hit by European carbon border adjustments when they come in. And America a few months ago was thinking of not having a carbon price, but using carbon border adjustments for the same kind of reason. Yeah, it has to be combined with carbon border adjustments, and I think they're very persuasive.
They're the way to spread it, yeah. And they're an essential part of the scheme.
Well, this is all new to me.
Is there a danger that the oil and gas companies will refuse to sell any fuel to countries that have the carbon fee scheme, and only to those that don't charge it?
I've not heard that question before, or that possibility before. It's kind of an interesting one. I would love to see it happening. I mean, wouldn't that be a good problem to have if the oil and gas companies refuse to sell their product?
I think Russia's doing that at the moment, actually.
So I think that one we can probably live with. And even if some took that principled stand, there would be others who would give us some emergency supplies if they were needed. So I think I can. Anyway, I don't know. I hadn't considered it before. Let's see what other.
And Colin says, is there a danger the fee will be kept too low, and we won't be addressing the urgent carbon issues?
I think that's absolutely true. That I can imagine agreeing to this and making bold statements, and then being a bit fearful about following through and actually ratcheting it up year on year. I think that sustained pressure is better. But I'd point this out. Doing it this way through carbon pricing, you have one issue around which to mobilize and campaign and pressurize. All the other ways involved repeated battles over every new license for a coal mine or an oil drilling exploration, over the exceptions that there will be to any legal regulations you bring in, or why that particular banning of an old technology should be delayed for this special case. All we know how regulation works in this country, and in most countries. It's a field day for lawyers. It's a field day for special pleading, for dodgy accountants, if I may say so. I'd rather not have multiple battles of that sort. I'd rather have one annual tussle over, shall we keep going with the plan that we promised people we would keep to, and that will generate more income to everybody who's there waiting to receive it. That's a more winnable battle, I think, than exhausting ourselves in lots of other tussles on regulatory approaches.
You mentioned the danger of it being used by the tabloids, you know, in a negative sense in terms of the word tax.
Oh, thank you.
A question from Henry. How I like the idea of a levy, but how do you stop it being described as a tax when up against an intransigent media? Is that why people like yourself are particularly using the word fee and rather than
fee
tax?
or levy? Yes, that's right. But you're absolutely, this is bound to happen, and what we call it is bound to be an issue. So I'm really glad to have this question. I would go fully tabloid on this and say it's not what we're talking about here is, it's not so much a tax. We're talking about a bung. Give us a bung, Boris. The people want a bung. You want the people to engage in the transition to a new economy. Okay, bung us. Cop us a bung, Boris. That would be my message. That and that's some politicians understand the language of payments and considerations in return for favors. Well, so that's I would go full on that and just say it's best look at it on the positive side. Don't get trapped in an argument about tax. I would avoid tax and I would avoid the Treasury as far as possible, but I don't believe we'll be able to succeed completely at that. I would focus on the income. But that's,
I think,
that's a personal view.
Thank you, Rob. I think Margaret wanted to ask a question verbally. If you unmute yourself, sorry, Margaret, you just need to unmute yourself.
Rob, I've just put it in chat.
All right, I see it. Yes. I can't give you a detailed answer to that, Margaret, a full answer. I've not thought that hard about it. My answer would be on the lines of India has lots of renewable resources as well, not just coal. If India is to manage on the basis of renewables, we need rapid technological innovation of the technologies for storage and hydrogen or whatever that they can then adopt. I mean, the area I know much better is actually Africa, and solar has taken off so fast in Africa. There's small scale solar all across the continent now. And those were technologies developed elsewhere, but which are being readily embraced. And I would hope the same would happen in countries like India and other, but India's, you know, quite a powerhouse in its own way in lots of areas. There's lots of terrific technology emerging there.
Thank you.
Quite a few questions are overlapping the sense, Rob, in that they're talking about how do we explain this to people who've never heard it before? How do we win over the public? Because it's quite complicated if you've never heard of this sort of concept before. How do we do that? I mean, obviously after tonight we're all going to go and tell people about it.
Well, maybe
that might not be sufficient.
Well, okay. Thank you. I think that what was I had an answer to this, and I'm afraid it slipped away. Somebody else answered the question. How do we explain it to people? That was the point, wasn't it? And I think the best explanation actually is getting the money in people's bank accounts. facts speak louder than words. So, and the survey information, as I understand it, the surveys suggest this very much as well, that people can't quite believe the policy. It's back to this, it sounds too good to be true. Where's the catch? Yeah. But if you're getting the money regularly in your bank account, well, that makes things look very different. Okay, so that would be the test. Get the money into bank accounts quickly. There's often questions about how can we do that? Is it feasible? I think that the important point here is we're not talking about some kind of universal credit kind of scheme, which has got to be hugely complicated. It's dead simple, flat rate to everybody. And I don't care if they use my national insurance number or if they use my NHS number. There are single numbers that citizens have. And it's, I mean, it won't be difficult to do better than rolling out stop and whatever it was called, test and trace. That was a far more complicated exercise. I think this is actually, by the standards of a large national IT system, this will be about as simple as they come.
Okay, so I think you've kind of answered Jane's question about how to practically make it work in terms of government infrastructure. And Catherine says, of course, that it won't be means tested. So that makes it a whole lot easier.
Absolutely crucial. It could be, if this was a way of buying off the Treasury, but please don't suggest it, it could be taxed. And the Treasury would get some money out of it then, because all the people who are, paying 40% would be paying some of it back, but it wouldn't affect the least well off. So there we are. But I would rather keep the Treasury out of it.
Can I just say, from my experience of going to the pharmacy, just having hit my 60th birthday and being told before I even said anything that my prescription was free, I think the government knows who we are and consulted.
Yeah. Catherine, could I ask what you mean about the IMF calls for all heavily emitting countries to have a carbon price? Well, is that true?
Yeah. There's a link there to the article, but both the IMF and the OECD say that a carbon price is the way, one of the main way to tackle fossil fuel consumption, and they're arguing for a high-ish price. As I say, the link actually tells you what it is. There are a lot of countries in the world. I can't remember if it's something like 67 that do have a carbon price of some sort. So we're not kind of arguing for something amazingly radical. And I've got a feeling that India might be contemplating it. And I know that China is as well. I mean, the difference between most carbon prices and the one we're proposing is that it's fairly returned to people so that it can rise in order to price out carbon without hitting householders. But and the IMF isn't kind of commenting on that, but it does. A lot of these big international institutions do think that we should be pricing pollution.
Yeah, of course.
Can I suggest that I think we've covered, I've looked back through the chat and I think we've covered most of the points there. If I could share screen again, we can move on to what I think is the really interesting next step, question of what the next steps are. And I'd like to do that as a way of, because I've got some questions for you, actually. So I'm going to share screen again for a bit, if that's all right. Is that working? Oh, I'm in the wrong place, but I'll get back to the right place very quickly. Okay, next. So the responses, and you could, what I think came out of the discussion is that these points were the ones which I've had in other discussions, and I think we've covered them. So then let's move on. And I haven't got anything particularly clever to say here, I'm afraid, or you'll be relieved to hear. For me, the first step's always, I think, in a situation like this, is to want to find out more, to reassure myself that I've understood it and think a bit more. And for that, I do recommend the website of Citizens Climate Lobby, where there's lots more information and links to really good stuff. The good stuff includes some training on relational campaigning and how to deal with, if you can get a group of you together, how to talk to and engage with politicians or power holders of one kind or another. So my own view is use your existing affiliations and networks. The diamonds are under your feet to start from where you are, all that stuff. I think there's always value in just registering your view, just asserting where you stand on something. Sometimes I think politicians just count their mail, they don't read it. And so don't overlook that. Here's where my questions come. I am absolutely not the person to have any ideas at all about how to use social media for this. And so if you know people of a different generation who don't have gray hair, who could think of ways to engage and campaign constructively without getting too shrill and adversarial, please, through social media, I think that'd be fantastic. I think there's a real opportunity there if you know somebody who might want to take that on.
Sorry, Rob, do you mind if I just pop in something at that moment?
Yeah, great, go for it.
So I'm an educationist by trade, but on the side, I'm a trustee of an education charity, a creative education charity, and we've just had a nice bit of funding to help our young people who are associated with our charity, who are in London, often in areas of deprivation, to make films about environment. And I put a link in earlier up, and it's the most, I'll put it in again, it's the most incredible, it's the first film to have been made so far. Oh, sorry, George, hold on. It's the first film to be made so far, and we're still looking for filmmakers. So if anyone knows of any young people who'd be interested in making films, and they can get money, so they could use this as a topic, because they've got to be about raising awareness of the climate. And for COP26, these films are going to be shown in really high profile places. So this film, I literally got the email tonight, is going to be shown at COP26 and beyond, because one of our advocates is the barrister and founder of COP26 and beyond. And so it will be shown at the annual conference of the UK Environmental Law Association, as well as Climate Italy 21 in Milan and other places. So the charity are actively looking for more young people who are filmmakers to develop films. And I think when you're talking about how do we get the message across, hopefully you'll all take a minute at some point to have a look and share, if you can, the link that I've put, because it's such a great way, it's such a great platform to communicate quite complex messages in a very visual, easy to digest manner. And these young people get funding as well for any resources they need to help them, and they're all supported by expert filmmakers at the charity that I support. But that's kind of one way.
That's fantastic.
I think it's quite an effective way.
Will you provide the details to us so that we can contact? You're muted, I'm afraid.
I've put the link in the chat.
Oh, good. Okay.
Oh, sorry, no, I haven't. Have I accidentally? Yeah, Eastside. I'll do it one more time. So it's
Okay.
Eastside, who I'm a trustee for, and I've put some information in there. And so if anyone's interested in making a film or supporting young children or asking young people they know who might be interested in getting involved, they can contact Eastside directly. But if you wanted to contact Eastside directly about when young people come to you and they want to make a film, this could be, hint, hint,
Mm-hmm.
a good subject to make a film about.
Thank you. That's terrific. And if you want to see what kids can do, even in the most simple ways, then one of the website links that I give is to the Citizens MK website, and you can get a YouTube of our accountability assembly with the leaders where we made presentations around climate change, and school kids videos were part of that. They were terrific, and it was very simple stuff, and it was very powerful. So, but that, needless to say, that was not what I was doing. So thank you very much, Nina. And if others have suggestions for social media and its uses, that would be lovely as well. I don't want to, if there are other suggestions, then that's great. Otherwise, I'm just going to get to the end of my own bit and leave you, I think, at that point. Here are the things that I've mentioned. I personally found the motivational interviewing course by Vince Schutt very, very interesting and helpful. I felt I was back to school and really learning some new exciting stuff. So I commend that. If you want to find out a bit more about the MK story, then the Citizens MK website has the actual resolution that was passed and more information on that. I would love to see, I mean, I think local councils are winnable. Just like the government itself, I believe, is winnable on this. There's a furious debate been going on within government, as Catherine was indicating. So I think this stuff is winnable, but so the more institutions and public bodies that send messages through, the better. And if you have a group that you can work with to do that good and well, I think I was sent this recently, and I think it's very simple and straightforward, and it gives a great riposte to some of the rather facile objections. You know, you can't go to a meeting about these topics without somebody asking, oh, how did you get here? And if the answer wasn't by foot or cycle, then you're some kind of hypocrite. So I think there's that might be useful to you. And then if you are losing hope at all, there's Joanna Macy's just put something else out, which is wonderful. So there you are. Those are some offerings from me. The website, I think, will carry these slides, so you should be able to pick them up there. And I did say I was from the Open University, so I always set self-assessment questions at the end. This is my self-assessment question. If you think you can answer it, that's great. If you aren't able to answer it, you might want to replay some of the bits of what we've been listening to see what the answer is to this. And this is based on what a councillor in Milton Keynes said to me in the crucial run-up to the vote. Oh, we can't do this. We've got to bring down the price of alternatives first. Otherwise, the less well-off will be heavily penalised. So what's the response to that? Or responses to this worthwhile concern, but misconceived. Anyway, there you are. So thank you. And that's a link as well to me if you want it. And that's enough for me. Over to you, Lucy.